Hi, my name is Chris Thurber. I'm a psychologist, a parent, and an author, and I am excited to talk with you today about my experiences as Let me try that over again. Keep going. You want to stop? Okay.
I actually want, you're really close to the top of your screen up here.
Okay. Yeah.
Tip your screen so it's catching your head more in the middle of the screen. There
Okay.
you go. That's
Okay.
better. Yeah. You were kind of chopped off there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that was actually good that you gave me a chance to stop.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I forgot to pause recording, so Henry's going to get a kick out of that. All right. Here we go. Mute me. Wait.
Yep.
Let me pause.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Thurber. I'm a psychologist, a parent, and boy, I got to get this right. I didn't flub up anything at the beginning of the last two. I'll pause for a few seconds and then keep going. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Thurber. I'm a psychologist, a parent, and an author, and I'm really excited to talk with you today about some of my experiences being an emotional literacy educator. One of the most powerful experiences that I recall having as a child was the first summer that I spent at overnight camp. Now, fast forward, that became part of my career, and I'll get to talking about that in a little bit, but I'd had some wonderful experiences at day camps and then finished with a day camp experience where I encountered some classic bullying, and it just soured me to the entire experience of going away from home. But my best friend had been going to this overnight camp and encouraged me to follow him there the subsequent summer. And so it was with some trepidation that I enrolled at YMCA Camp Belknap in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. Well, as a 12-year-old, most of the campers around me had already been going to overnight camp for a couple of years and had been acculturated to what Belknap stood for, which was kindness and unselfishness. And I was taken aback when I signed up for a riflery period, which was one of those activities with a limited number of camper spots simply because of size and safety issues. So there are raffles at Belknap for activities with limitations in enrollment, but it's all fair. So if you, for example, don't get to shoot archery or riflery or go sailing on a Monday, you can do that the following day. But the sign up after the meal concluded, and the 12 campers who had won a number and gotten a chance to come to, I'm going to start that over, Marlene. I'm just like not in my groove here. I don't know why. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Thurber. I'm a psychologist, a parent, and an author, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned as a professional and as a human being about being an emotional literacy educator. I think one of the earliest, most powerful experiences I had was the first summer that I spent at overnight camp. Having had a mixed experience with some day camps earlier in my childhood, I wasn't too excited about going to overnight camp, but my best friend encouraged me to go. He'd been to Camp Belknap, which is in central New Hampshire, for several summers. And he said, Chris, whatever your previous experience with camp has been like, I promise this will be the best. This will be different. And it takes a best friend to convince somebody of something, that important. I was going to spend 2 weeks away from home. And he was right. And I loved it. And I'll never forget the first full program day that we had. I was super excited to sign up for some target sports like riflery and archery because they were things that I'd never done before. And when I went to the gathering after lunch for, campers who wanted to shoot riflery that day. It was explained that only 12 kids could be part of that activity period at a time. So the cabin leader was going to conduct a little raffle, and anyone who didn't make the raffle on Monday could be part of the activity period on Tuesday. I was really happy that I chose one of the numbers that allowed me to go on Monday because, as I said, I was super enthusiastic about this. So after our rest hour, after siesta, I showed up at the rifle range, but I showed up with 12 other boys, not 11 other boys. So when the leaders who were guiding that activity started setting up and turned around and saw that there were 13 boys on the bench, one of the leaders sat down very calmly, said, listen, you can see that there are 4 stations here, and we're equipped in a 75-minute activity period to allow a line of 4 kids to, shoot twice, and we can move through 3 lines. So that's 12, and that's why we did the raffle. And if you didn't guess one of the winning numbers for today, I just want to remind you that you can shoot riflery tomorrow if that's what you'd like to do. So whoever it is that was confused about whether it's today or tomorrow can go do softball or ultimate frisbee or go to a swim lesson or something that doesn't require a sign up and didn't have limited spaces. Well, I knew that I wasn't one of those boys, so I just waited and looked around, as did some of the other boys. And just then, my friend Dan, who was in my cabin, stood up and said, well, that's okay, I'll go play softball. And I grabbed him by the shirt sleeve and pulled him back down on the bench. And I said, no, Dan, you got to stay. I know you guessed one of those winning numbers. It's somebody else who's not telling the truth. And he stood up again and he said, no, it's okay, it doesn't matter. Somebody else can take my spot, whatever it is, and I'll shoot tomorrow. And for some people listening, that might seem like a mundane example, but what struck me and has stuck with me for, 40 years is the fact that a peer, another kid my age, 12 years old, was that magnanimous, that unselfish. Because in my neighborhood and at my school, you didn't get what you wanted, like a spot at an activity period or to be pitcher of the kickball game or a swing at recess, unless you really fought for it. It was about selfishness. It wasn't about empathy or compassion or unselfishness. And so this was a like a radical paradigm shift for me. It was unbelievable to see this happening. And you know, I fell in love with Belknap and returned for 2 more summers as a camper, was just honored to have been invited back as a junior leader following my senior camper year, and then worked at Belknap for 36 summers. So it opened my eyes to a different way of people getting along. And it very much was emotional literacy. It was consideration for what other people thought. It was regard for the community at large. And my parents had always set a good example for me of being a compassionate and emotionally literate person. But I'd never seen it in my peers at school and in the neighborhood. And suddenly there was this sterling example of leadership by example. I'm just going to show you how this works and how it benefits everyone. But it was counterintuitive to me that being unselfish in that way would somehow come back to benefit me, to benefit others, to benefit the community. And there were so many examples of peers believing in one another. I think another early experience that reinforced the importance of having someone believe in you and understand what you might be going through also happened somewhat inadvertently. Our kitchen was being remodeled. This was also when I was about 12 or 13. And one of the carpenters could see that I was really interested when I came home from school in helping out. And I'm, in retrospect, I'm not sure how much I helped out, but you know, he gave me a hammer and some nails, and I helped with some of the rough framing. And one day he said, Chris, if you're really interested in this kind of carpentry work, you might go up to Portland Players, the local theater, and um, ask if you can help out. In fact, currently I'm the stage manager or whatever he was, a production manager, and just go up there after school tomorrow and tell him Garland said it was fine for you to help out. I thought, wow, okay. I mean, I hadn't even gotten to the theater, but it felt good that there was an adult who had some confidence in me, didn't question my interest in theater or building. And again, that stood in stark contrast to my public school experience. Uh, I'd like to think that even the school where I went in South Portland, Maine, has long since changed. But when I was there in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, if you were interested in something artistic or musical, it wasn't popular. And you were bullied, criticized, made fun of in a very traditional way. Um, it was startling to me, and it is now when I look back at how short-sighted that is. But suddenly here was someone who didn't care about what I was interested in, even if it was something theatrical or artistic. And so I showed up the next day at this community theater, put my backpack down, and Garland wasn't there. He was, of course, working on our house, but he had told me that if I was there on the weekends, I'd get to see him. So I introduced myself to the one person I could find who was putting something together on the stage, said, I'm Chris, and Garland said it was okay if I stopped here to help out. And yeah, this guy who was in his late 20s, probably, or early 30s, just said to me, like, okay, well, you see those 2x4s over there, we need to be cutting those into 3-foot lengths. It's going to be part of this riser. And so that if you want to help out, that's the next thing you could do. Right. So not wanting to look stupid, but being a teenager and thinking that I was, omnipotent, I walked over to this stack of lumber, and there was sitting there a circular saw, an electric circular saw. And not only had I never used an electric circular saw, but I'd been warned by my dad, whose father, my grandfather, was a pretty serious woodworker, that power tools are dangerous. And so what did I do? Again, not wanting to look stupid and very much wanting to be part of this group that was making sets and having so much fun up at the theater, or so I imagined. I picked up the circular saw and plugged it in and, pulled the trigger and prayed, without safety glasses on, without any instruction, probably without even drawing a line of, where I should cut it. I just had a tape measure, and yeah, I still have 10 fingers, and that's good. I would have, if I had been that adult who was volunteering himself at the theater, provided a bit more instruction, but I didn't get it. What I got, though, was another grown-up, just like Garland, who believed in me just a priori. You have some interest, let's make it happen. And I understand that there was a risk there, and I understand that I would do it differently if I were the adult in that position. But the emotional part of it, I wouldn't change a bit, and that is the confidence, the belief, someone to say, glad you're here. Essentially, not going to ask any questions, certainly not going to ridicule you for something that you are passionate about. And I'm going to give you some real legitimate responsibility, not tokenistic. It wasn't okay, take these programs for the next show and put them in this box or alphabetize them or something. It was real work, and it made me take it very seriously. And it's something that as a parent, I've also tried to do. Yes, address the safety concerns, but not shy away from really challenging experiences, for my own kids. And those challenging experiences too, as a professional psychologist as well as a parent, are at once humbling and also edifying. I feel as a clinician, I'm constantly learning about emotional literacy and teaching about emotional literacy. As a young adult, when I first started as a cabin leader at Belknap with my own cabin, having been through several summers of apprenticeship, I remember returning from the waterfront, having lifeguarded, and then spent a few minutes cleaning up, putting away kickboards and putting lost and found in the bin and so forth. So it was a few minutes after everyone was supposed to be back at their cabins. And on my way up this beautiful grove of white pine trees, I spotted a boy at the foot of one of the trees, and he had his head in his hands. What went through my mind was, he's late, I'm late. So I said, "Hey, buddy," and he lifted his head up, and I could see that it was a camper I knew. His name was Alex, and he had clearly been crying. His eyes were bloodshot, and his, cheeks are full of tears. And I just continued. I said, "Listen, it's 12:40. We were all supposed to be back in our cabins about 5 minutes ago, and so, um, it's time to head back." And he didn't budge, and that was probably a good prompt for me to realize, you know, even as a young cabin leader, 17 years old, this was one of those times when you had to take a minute and sit down and find out what was going on with a kid. Um, Again, there wasn't any urgent safety concern, but there was definitely something emotional that was going on. Uh, and even if I'd had no training, I would like to think that I was compassionate enough to at least sit down and listen, which is what I did. And he described some pretty intense homesickness. He missed his mom and his dad and his little sister and his dog and home cooking and his room at home and his friends from home. And, the list goes on. And homesickness is different for everybody, but we all miss things about home when we're away. We are pre-wired to attach to other humans, to places, to things. And, I since have a much better understanding of homesickness, but I'll tell you that story in just a minute. Back to Alex, who told me what was wrong, and I responded in the way that I had been trained, which was a stock phrase. "Hey, listen, if you stay busy, if you go to all your activity periods and, hang out with your friends during free time, homesickness will go away almost by itself after just like 3 days, 4 days max." And his eyes kind of widened, and I thought to myself, "Wow, I'm pretty good at this whole cabin leader thing. I think I can solve even the toughest problems." But I was wrong, and you know, God bless Alex for calling me in. He said, "Chris, you realize this is day 10, right? And I'm here for 4 weeks." And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, that stock phrase doesn't work," right? That was another sobering moment of, my realizing my emotional illiteracy, that being emotionally literate is not about memorizing stock phrases or things you should do in a book or something like that. You have to be humble, you have to be a good listener. And all of this was going through my brain when Alex said, um, he looked at me and he said, "Chris, you don't really know how to fix this, do you?" And it's like, wow. And I've had some humbling moments as a parent, as well as a psychologist. I don't know that any of them quite matches that moment, because not only was he absolutely 100% right, but it was something that I really hadn't considered before, that there was a lot I didn't know. And that sounds awfully arrogant to say, but that was the position of learning, and at the time relative ignorance that I was in. I did say to him, "Alex, listen, I think you're right. I'm kind of stuck here, and let me get you set up with Mark, who's the division head, who's been here a lot longer than I have, and I think he can probably help." Well, Belknap became a place for me where not only did I have great role models of unselfishness, as I talked about earlier, but also, as an all boys camp, people might have thought that there would be a reluctance to express emotion, and that it would be a pretty tough place to learn about emotion. And partly that's because of the way that a lot of boys and men are socialized to keep a stiff upper lip, and what some people call the boy code of, not really showing when you're in pain. That certainly was not the case at Belknap, and not just kids like Alex being willing to be tearful and say what he missed and loved, but we celebrated with a lot of, appropriate physical affection and a lot of appropriate emotional disclosure. And that, of course, uh, nurtures and strengthens relationships like nothing else. So it was a wonderful sort of crucible for me, a wonderful classroom as well as a wonderful laboratory. And when in my early 20s, it was time to choose a dissertation topic. After my first year of classes in the PhD program at UCLA, I I thought, well, maybe there's a way to have the best of both worlds. Maybe I can keep going back to camp and get some research done at the same time. And I thought maybe that researching homesickness would be the way to go. But I was certain that somebody, somewhere must have already answered all the questions that there are to know about homesickness, because it's mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. It's mentioned in the Old Testament. People have been traveling away from the place they call home since there have been people. So we've got to have, exhausted the research on this topic. We'll come to find out that there were maybe a dozen studies that had been done with college freshmen, and one study that had been done with young people as young as 14 at an outward bound school in Australia. But other than that, there weren't any studies of homesickness in children. And here at Belknap, there were kids as young as 8 who were away from home for 2 or 4 weeks. And so this became a wonderful place to collect data. And yeah, I published a half a dozen studies and finished my dissertation all about young people's adjustment to separation from home at camps, at boarding schools, even separations from home that they don't anticipate or particularly enjoy, like being hospitalized for a long time. So you can imagine the delight that I had, the sort of satisfaction of sending a book to Alex. The first book I wrote, the Summer Camp Handbook, which was largely centered on not just finding a camp that, suits your child's interests and abilities, but the emotional preparation for such a profound experience, and inscribing it to him and thanking him for really having been the inspiration for my learning more about this phenomenon, and also taking a pretty deep dive into what the emotional life of young people really entails, and the ways in which homesickness relates to attachment and depression and anxiety, and the ways in which it's different. So, and that's been, a tremendous, tremendous professional journey for me. But inspired by what? Inspired by the candid comment of a boy talking about his own emotions. And that continues to be in my work here at Phillips Exeter Academy, which is an independent school in New Hampshire. Um, with all the students we have from nearly 40 different countries and almost all 50 states, all across different socioeconomic scales, um, lots and lots of different backgrounds, but many common human experiences, including, the emotional distress that comes along with excessive parental pressure, or homesickness at being away from home, or not believing in oneself anymore, because undoubtedly, at schools like Exeter, around the world where there are competitive admissions, and this is true whether you're talking about a junior boarding school or a secondary school or a college or a university, you have a certain idea of your own competence, and that is something that fuels a lot of positive emotion. When you're immersed in an environment where your peers are equally, if not more, skilled, you have to recalibrate your self-esteem. There is a lot of emotional distress that goes along with getting your first B or your first C, or feeling really overwhelmed by the quantity of work. And I think we can all harken back to experiences that made us question our competence, made us question our past, choices. But without some kind of emotional literacy, without understanding our feelings, the feelings of others, we have a really hard time navigating a significant life challenge, you know, such as heading off to college or university. So, it's been interesting having devoted a significant amount of my career to understanding and treating homesickness, which people often react to by saying, "Oh, that's kind of cute." Like that's, "Oh yeah, I've been homesick." And it is this kind of normative pathology that just like any other strong emotional experience varies in intensity from, fairly benign to something that is nearly incapacitating. But when people start to really think about what it means to be emotionally distressed when you push yourself out of your comfort zone, then I become a lot more interested in the work that I've done. And, most recently, the book that I just finished the manuscript for, which is called The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, my co-author Hank and I have worked really hard to educate parents and other caregivers about how their misunderstanding of their children's emotions take their good intentions, which is to want the best for their child and to push them in an appropriate way toward excellence so that doors open for them at the college or university level or eventually professionally, but that without a clear understanding of how this kind of really specific pressure where you name a specific goal for a child and say, well, this is where you should be headed, and this is what I want to see you do. And unless you do X, you're not going to get Y. So the framing of that is as a do or die kind of situation. That creates an incredible amount of unhealthy pressure and the emotional distress that students feel. uh, Older teenagers, 16, 17, 18 years old, lands them in my office because now they're so revved up and are experiencing so much performance anxiety that they're not able to complete their homework or take an exam or standardized tests. So if I think globally about why emotional literacy is so important, I think partly it's so that we can face challenges as human beings armed with some resilience and knowing ourselves, knowing other people's perspectives, and being able to acknowledge and process emotions reduces conflicts, helps us focus and concentrate when it really counts, even if we feel that the stakes are high. And it also helps us reframe a lot of what we're experiencing. And by that, I simply mean um, if we take homesickness as an example, um, when I tell kids, whether they're campers or students here at Exeter, you know, I understand that the homesickness you're feeling hurts, and it is getting in the way of you're feeling motivated or social. I also want you to understand that it's normal. It's normal not only because there are things about home you love, but it's normal because you haven't had a lot of experiences away from home. And the few experiences that you have had away from home haven't been this demanding. This is different from overnight at a friend's house where you watch a movie and eat some popcorn and, stay up late, you know, telling inappropriate jokes. Um, this is a pretty demanding set of circumstances, and um, you're very attached to those things at home. And it is a reflection of love. It's a reflection of how wonderful those things are, how great your parents are, or how great your siblings are, or how wonderful the town you live in is that you miss it so much. And I also reframe it for them and tell it's not a choice you have to make. You're here at school for a few months, and then you have a break, and you're home for a few weeks, and then you'll be back at school. And so stop thinking about it as 4 years and start thinking about it as a series of 2 to 3 month chunks. Anyway, that kind of reframing, not just of the emotional valence, but also the meaning behind the emotion, is part of the emotional literacy that I do. And of course, not every negative emotion has a silver lining, but there is a universality to both positive and negative emotions. And without some fluency, without being literate in this core aspect of what makes us humans, we stumble, we fight back, we criticize other people, we blame the next person. And again, globally, I see emotional literacy as a way to reduce conflict so that we can take another person's perspective, we can listen, we can not accuse, and we can turn conflicts into win-win situations. I also see it as a way to, personal and professional success. If you don't want a strong negative emotion like anger or anxiety to get in the way of what you want to achieve, um, then you'll have to understand it. You'll have to sort of know a little bit about where it comes from. Um, so, it's been a journey for me, and I know it'll continue to be a lifelong journey. It's not something that we ever, you know, fully achieve, but we do the best we can, and we fumble along, and if we have the humility to learn from other people and to reflect a bit on our own experiences, then we can make a small contribution. So I hope that some of what I've shared with you has made a small contribution and maybe has prompted you to think about some of the experiences you've had in your life that have also inspired you, taught you, and brought you down this road a little bit further. And maybe there's something that you can do to bring others along with you. So thanks for listening.